A special thank you to our sponsor, Annie Mac Home Mortgage, whose Cash to Keys product is disrupting the industry. Sick and tired of finding the perfect home, not having your offer selected? I got to tell you, it happens all the time. With Cash to Keys, Annie Mac gives sellers a cash guarantee for each of their buyers' offers. Stop bidding and hoping. Instead, bid with Annie Mac and bid with confidence. Don't just bid, but win. Annie Mac Mortgage. Episode 10 of The Wealth Architect. I'm Emilio DiSpirito, and today's guest is a fantastic one. You're going to want to make sure you get that notepad and pen and write some stuff down because he certainly knows his stuff all around development. Today's guest is John McNellis, and John has successfully developed over 100 mixed-use and commercial developments, mainly in Northern California, and he's been at it since 1982. He's a best-selling book author. This is not the latest version. This is Making It in Real Estate. He's got two other versions. I bought his first book, became a fan, and he's a national speaker as well, too. John brings decades of experience, wit, and wisdom to today's conversation. And today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of development with John McNellis. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Emilio. I wish half of what you said about me was true, but
Yeah.
but thanks. I appreciate it.
John, you're welcome. I've been following you for many years. I've seen many of your interviews online, and I'm honored to have you on the program today because we have a lot of people that are either, in the trenches of developing already, to, wanting to know where to start. So we're going to go over different things from beginner that will help the beginner developers to intermediate to the more advanced developers. And I know you have the knowledge, again, since 1982, to really be a great resource for us. So you're welcome. Thank you.
Sure, fire away.
Yeah. So John, I want to start with this, okay, and then we'll dive into the beginner end of it. But if you had to sum up what it really takes to make it in real estate development today in one sentence, what would it be?
Persistently applied common sense.
Persistent. Do people still have common sense, right?
Yeah, no, I think so. That was 3 or 4 words, but I think persistence. You've got to say, let's face it, what we do is difficult. Usually, Emilio, in development, we're going to encounter at best kind of benign indifference.
Mhm.
People don't really care what we're doing, and that's the best. Often it's not. We are hit with lots of opposition. The competition doesn't want us to build. Neighborhood doesn't want us to build. The city is tough. So to succeed as a developer, as opposed to an investor, I think you need to be really quite persistent. And also, you need to be willing to take risk, a certain amount of risk. There's sort of a Goldilocks amount of risk. If you don't take any, you're not going to get anywhere. If you take too much, you're going to flame out. So that's where the common sense part comes in. I see this deal and there are 5 risk factors, and I need to analyze each of those and say, okay, I can live with this, I can live with this, I can live with this. Whoops, these last 2 I can't live with. I'm going to walk away from the deal.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can work my way around the risk factors and then to jump in, there's always going to be some risk. That's how you succeed.
All right, John. So you said that it takes, you said persistently applied common sense is what you would say. And I love that. You actually summed it up into 4 words. I said a whole sentence. You got it done in 4 words. And what I was saying was that, what is common sense for you isn't necessarily common sense necessarily for somebody who's starting out, right? So I want to give anybody who is listening hope. And I want to let you know that we're going to guide you through this. So, John, let's dive in and talk with our listeners about, you started in law, okay, and you pivoted and turned it into a development career. What advice would you give someone making their first leap in real estate development?
My best advice, and it's in that book you so kindly waived, is do it on the side. And I think the best way to start, and this is the way I did when I was 24. You buy a little house or a duplex. You buy the worst one you can find in the best neighborhood you can find. I hate the TV shows where the guys have the boats and the planes and they say how easy it is. It's not. It's difficult. They're hard
Mhm.
to find. But what I like about it, Emilio, is buying that house has all the components of the larger deal. The finding it, the negotiating, working with the broker, having it checked out, financing it, fixing it up. It's kind of like the Wright brothers airplane has the basic components of a 747, but it just gets much more complicated as you go. But what I like about houses and residential, at least here in Northern California in particular, is essentially because we have a housing shortage, there's no vacancy factor. If you think about
Mhm.
it, every other discipline or silo in commercial real estate, office, industrial, retail, you have to contend with the fact that you may not find tenants. You may be dealing with a lot of vacancy. The office market right now nationwide is in a shambles. Retail is good, but we still have vacancy. But in residential, particularly the lower end residential that you'd be starting out in, and I don't know about Rhode Island, but here in California, you may not get the rent you want, but you'll get the rent. You may not get the sales
Mhm.
price you want, but you'll get a sales price. That's why I think of starting out with a house as the training wheels deal for a young developer, and I did at least half a dozen of them, on my way further up.
That's great advice, John. And somebody doing it too, depending on where they are. Some states have 100% financing for brand new buyers with grant programs as well too. So if you can, so we call that house hacking, and that's the best advice that you can give somebody that wants to get into real estate development, that wants to understand real estate, and start small. Start there. Another really good tip too. And curious on your thoughts on this: buy like a 2, a 3, or a 4 unit if possible, right? Because you can get your FHA or your different types of financing through there with very little to no money down that has a potential separate lot.
Yes.
And then that lot, hang on to it. And when you start saving up, save up 20, 30 grand, you can start getting the survey done. You can go get hopefully the lot subdivided, and then you can either partner with the builder, and we're going to talk about this a little bit further. And now you've literally set yourself up for your first development.
Yeah. Emilio, you don't need me on the show. That's great advice. And I did that. So I went from house, duplex, fourplex, and then actually, when I was a young lawyer, I didn't know anything about construction. And if your viewers won't repeat it, I'll tell you the truth. I still don't know anything about construction. But but I talked three buddies into buying a really nice fourplex in San Francisco, and I did what I called a lawyer development. That is, I converted it to condos. So it was all just a little bit of paint and paperwork, doing all the necessary paper. And then I took the profit from that and I bought a sixplex, but it was one lot, but a fourplex and a duplex. And all I did with
Mhm.
that was go to the city and say, gee, this is a non-conforming use. I don't know if they use the term in Rhode Island.
We do.
I said, if this were to burn down, I wouldn't be able to build these six residential units. So I said, why don't we let me split this into two so that we'll preserve the housing stock? And they said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So all I did was put an imaginary line between the two, and I sold off the one building and almost paid off the loan on the other. That's a great way to start out. Just not taking big risks, not taking construction risks, but I love the idea of buying a parcel that's too large and then peeling off a piece and then maybe selling that and bringing your basis down.
Yeah, and that I think that's one of the best opportunities out there right now for a young investor or an older brand new investor or somebody that's been doing it a long time. We have a serious housing shortage not only in California but even in Rhode Island, coast to coast. This is an issue right now, and you can help out that issue, and whenever there's problems, there's ways to capitalize, and real estate is the best way to do that. So, fantastic advice, John. Thank you very much. I'm curious, right? And I don't want to spend too much time in the rookie area. I want to get to intermediate and to the advanced because I know you got some really great stuff there. What are the common rookie mistakes that you see in development? Okay. And how can beginners avoid those?
Emilio, I'm just going to tell you mistakes I made, but one of them was, I'm still a lawyer, I'm practicing law, and I'm doing real estate on the side. And I decide, I'm a smart guy, I'm a lawyer, I'll get a broker's license, and then I'll save the fees. That way, when I go to my investors, I can say it's not going to cost you anything. All I'm doing is getting my 3% share. Huge
Yeah.
mistake. Huge mistake. Because if you act as your own broker, all you're going to be able to buy is crap, because you know the brokers out there, the guys who know what they're doing, the pros, they're going to look at you and say no way. So if there's a piece of junk that's been on the market for a year and no one's looking at it, the listing broker will say, oh sure man, go ahead, get your half commission, we don't care, but you're buying
Mhm.
junk. A great piece of property, the one you want, you're not going to see it. The brokers aren't going to tell you about it if you say you're representing yourself. Don't be your own broker.
I'd want to interject something right there too, because I do sell real estate. I do own a brokerage. Okay. And I find that my clients that are the most successful don't look at me as a line item expense. They look at me as a value add, because they're getting in front of deals and developments and rehabs and opportunities in which they would have never gotten in front of. And in addition to that front end, right? What about the back end? What about a broker who can not only negotiate their fee, but can negotiate your bottom line as well, which is the most important, especially if you're going to take that and turn it into either a portfolio or other projects. So, John, that was great advice. You're 40 years in, and you said, don't be your own broker. Never mind the time that it takes for people to do someone else's job. I'm not my own attorney. I'm not going to pretend to be an attorney. I'm hiring an attorney. I could draw up my deed, right? I could record a deed, but it's going to probably be wrong. And I'm going to spend 7 hours on Chat GPT trying to figure it out.
Yeah, just to hone that advice in a little bit more, Emilio, what I would say, if you're starting out, don't act as your own broker. But let's say you take my advice and you say, all right, I'm going to go find a residence. And let's say it's a small town in Rhode Island or Northern California. I would go to that town where I want to develop, and I would ask, who's the best residential broker in town? And
Mhm.
then I would go to him or her and say, I'm your new best friend. Let's have coffee. Let's have lunch. I want to see all your deals. You'll get a full commission. And not only will you get a full commission because I know I'm competing, I'll guarantee you the back end. That is, when I sell this, because I'm going to buy it, fix it up, and sell it within a year or two, you'll get the sales commission. You have your day job, whatever it is. You're a tech guy. Uh, you don't have the ability or the time to go find the properties, but your new
That's
best
right.
friend broker, he will. And in fact, you want to take it to the next level, to like double A ball. You can tell that broker, not only will you get your full commission, Jack, but after I get my money back plus, let's say, a 10% return, I'm going to give you a 5% piece of the deal. The big companies can't do that. The larger
Hmm.
developers can't do that, but you as an individual can do that. And guess what? It works like a charm. One of who was it? Warren Buffett's sidekick said that that nothing more powerful in the universe than a financial incentive, and I think that's true. And we've done that a number of times, which is how I can compete with far larger developers.
That's amazing advice.
You bring me the deal and you got 5% of the back end. And the other thing is that ties you to me for 2 or 3 years. We're talking all the time. You're going to show me another deal.
100%. It's all about relationships. You've done about 100 projects. John, if you had to add up, and I'm going to throw you on the spot here for a second, if you had to add up the overall value of those 100 projects, okay, what do you think that total value is of those 100 projects?
Haven't looked at it that way. When I started out like I'm sure most of your listeners, with zero money and just
Mhm.
ambition. So when you start out, you have to take in partners, and you start with family and friends, right? You go to the guys that you play basketball
The
with,
minnows.
or your sorority, yeah, the minnows. You, you line them up, you do a deal, you do another deal with them, and another. But pretty soon, you're going to run out of family and friends money, and you move up to the next level, which maybe like country club money, where, oh yeah, there's this rich guy that, and he's good for a couple million or 5 million or whatever the number is. But you keep working. If you're successful, you'll keep moving up to a point where you get big time financial partners, institutions. I started on exactly that way: family and friends, larger institutions. And then by the mid 80s, it was roaring, and we were doing, large scale joint ventures with big heavyweight financial institutions. By the end of the 80s, by the end of that recession, I said, no more. I don't want these big partners. I'd rather do a $1 million deal and own 100% of it, buy a gas station or a McDonald's, than have 10% of a $10 million deal or 1% of a $100 million deal with a lot of fancy guys. So the way we funded our deals, Emilio, is we've sold as we've gone in order to get the next deal. So we've sold 3 out of, we've got maybe 30 in the portfolio now. So we've sold 70%. And this goes back 40 years. So I'm not trying to be evasive, but I have no idea what all those properties would be worth today.
I mean, quite a bit. So the reason why I was asking you that, and if you're just tuning in now, or you're just kind of tuned back into the conversation now, right? John has successfully developed 100 deals. He's currently holding 30 of these projects, but 100 of them over time. John, if you had to give a guess, how many of those deals came from those brokers that you said, hey, you're my new best friend, we're going to work together? How many of them came from inside sources? Like, hey, I know of a project. I've got the inside scoop. It's an off-market type of situation. Out of 100, is it 5%, 10%, 20?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it might be easier to flip that on its head and answer it the other way and say, how many deals have we done that we didn't have some kind of inside track on? How many deals where we just went out there and said, gee, this guy Emilio has a listing and there's 20 guys bidding for it, and we're going to try to get it? And the answer to that is almost none. If the deal hasn't been off market, sometimes they're off market. Sometimes they've been on the market so long, they've been overpriced, say. There's almost always something where we have a kind of an edge. We, just like everybody else, we get maybe 100 packages a day, and maybe we'll look at 1 or 2. But if it's just a straight out horse race, where the whole world gets the package about the shopping center in Rhode Island, we're never going to win that horse race. And if we do win that horse race, we're going to pay too much. So I would say the vast majority of our deals have come with some kind of inside track to it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got very, very small margins when you have so many people going in and bidding. And yeah, I don't even want to get involved with those type of deals myself, John, because there's people out there that they might be first timers, or they just might get, the construction costs might be so low because of whatever they're doing on their end, correctly, incorrectly. But I've seen people bid so high and go bankrupt, right? So the off-market type of properties are a huge win, and having those inside type of connections, either to brokers that know about the off-market stuff, or other developers that are saying, hey, I got too much in my pipeline, John, why don't you take this? That's pretty much where you've got all of your deals over the years.
Right. Actually, just coincidentally, I was talking with one of my partners this morning who told me that he has a very good friend. He was a tech guy. So, and here in Silicon Valley, and this is common enough, the tech guy wants to get into real estate, but he's got so much money and he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So he said he's doing development deals at a 3.5% return. Now, you and I would be trudging up the bankruptcy court steps if we were trying to develop at a 3.5% return. This guy is so rich, he doesn't care. So what I'd like to stress to your listeners is, in a horse race, not everybody has the same motivation that you do. So somebody can be trading and they don't really care. Somebody says, I'm buying this for my grandchildren and I don't care if I get a 2% return. But if you're in the business of making money, of saying, I want to get a 20% return or whatever it is, you have to pull back and say, I can't compete with these guys. They have different financial motivations than I do.
And while we're on that topic about a return on investment, okay, what exactly do you have, like just a certain calculation you follow? Is it a strict, and mine, by the way, I mainly go for a 20% return on if I'm doing flips, property renovations. Do you have a set ratio?
I do. See, the rule of thumb, what we try to develop, we try to develop at a return 2% higher than the cap rate that we can sell for. So if it's If we know that, let's say we're doing a Chick-fil-A deal, that's easy, and that we know that Chick-fil-A's will sell somewhere between a 4.5 and a 5% return. What we want to get is going into that the 6.5% return on cost.
All right, John, I want to get into the intermediate developers, right? So these are people that, and you may have a different definition for intermediate, but I would say this is somebody that's been, doing development in some sort of fashion for a few years. They've gotten maybe 10 deals behind them. They know what they're doing. They they're not wet behind the ears anymore. They know what they're doing, right? So once they've done about 10 smaller projects, how should they think about scaling while managing risk?
What I would do is steadily increase the size and complexity of the deal. You don't want to go from doing, let's say, 10 $5 million deals. You don't want to suddenly jump up on your 11th deal to 50. But I think you want to be pushing it, assuming you're ambitious and really you want to get ahead. You want to be pushing it a little bit and kind of gradually, if you think of a kind of a gradual climb in the cost and complexity of deals, I think that's the right way to go. Part of it is how much access you have to capital, how well you're doing, and if your capital partners are willing to fund you on the next step up the ladder.
And as far as access to capital goes, I mean, there's your local lending institutions, which can be pretty fantastic depending on the deal and their appetite for working with somebody. But I want to talk a little bit about outside of the box lending practices, okay? Because part of development, a large part of it is finding the money. And you can of course get this from private sources, right? And that's probably the best way. But if somebody doesn't have access to that kind of network yet, and they're going to these local lending institutions, are there any tips you can give them on how to best present themselves and the project? I mean, because really that's what they're doing, John, right? They have to sell themselves and the project, correct?
Right. So let's say you're established in a community and you want to move up a level. Uh, the first thing I would do, just to back it up a little bit, back to the guy who's found the neighborhood he wants to do the house in, he should or she should open a bank account, ask around which is the best community bank, a small regional bank that's actually interested in doing real estate. You go in there
Mhm.
and you put in $50,000 or $100,000 and you set up the account. You don't ask for anything. Once you've made the deposit, so they know you've got some cash, you ask to see the loan officer and you explain what you're trying to do. And you say, here, let's have coffee, let's have lunch. Here's what my portfolio looks like. This is what, I want to take the next step. Are you with me? Kind of developing, the banking practice. But as an aside, Emilio, and nobody believes me on this, that the young people who start out, I think finding capital isn't that hard. If you have a great deal, if you find a deal that that says, look, it's like you pointed out, a 20% return, there are trillions of dollars sloshing around waiting to get into real estate, which is why every time there's a downturn, they say, oh my God, there's going to be a feeding frenzy and everyone's going to get these brilliant deals. Well, that almost never happens because there's so much capital out there. At the moment things start to look pretty good, it floods in and the prices stay up. There aren't that many great deals. Even if you find a deal where you can tell an investor, look, Jack, it's a 10% return. You're getting 4.5% today in your money market account. Here's the deal. It's 10% a year, and then we'll sell it in 5 years. And I think you'll make another 10 or 15% on the back end. That's a pretty good deal for a guy who's only getting 4.5%.
Agreed.
The first step is to find a good deal.
Have you ever heard of upfront underwriting? Well, I haven't until I started working with Movement Mortgage. Movement Mortgage is one of the top loan originators around the country. Specifically, I want to give a thank you to Matt Bates. And if you're lucky enough to live in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, or New Hampshire, I strongly suggest you contact Matt Bates at rimortgageguy.com. Again, rimortgageguy.com. And he's going to help you to find that dream home. He does upfront underwriting, which means they fully approve you for a mortgage before you even place offers, increasing your chances of winning that dream home. rimortgageguy.com. Some of the deals that you find, and some of the deals that investors and developers are finding, you have to get a little creative and you have to show people your vision. So, a client of mine, his name is Greg Rice. He bought a church, and he was one of the first people to do this in Rhode Island. And he converted the church into 32 luxury apartments. It was an old church, beautiful old church, and um, the rectory. And no one wanted to finance this guy, John. I mean, he went to like 9 or 10 different banks, and finally he saw one that believed in him, and they made it happen. Now everyone's throwing money at this guy. Let's talk about an outside of box situation, right? Where you have to bring something that has never been done before or something new to that specific marketplace. What is the best way to kind of pitch your idea and show them, hey, I've got the credibility? Any, you see what I'm putting down here? Any outside of the box ways to do this?
That I haven't done. I've essentially been a shopping center developer for the last 40 odd years. We do neighborhood centers with Safeway, Walmart, Ross, and so on. And so I have just been kind of right down Broadway with my deals. And to the extent I'm creative, it's not that much in real estate. I tend to stick with bread and butter deals. So
Got it.
I'm probably not the right one to answer that question.
Well, that's okay. And I'm glad I still asked because look, if you want, and in itself is an answer there, guys, all right? Because he said, look, bread and butter deals are the shopping plazas. And it doesn't mean that they're cut and dry and easy, but if you want something, if you're super maybe, into more safer investment, John, would you agree that something like that is a safer investment? It might have smaller returns, but it's a safer investment.
Sure. If you stick with right down Broadway, industrial retail or office, I would say if you want to be creative, uh, do that on the side. Become a painter, collect stamps, do it, write books. But
Yeah.
the guys who get really too creative, the wild projects. I'm just a little conservative. Yeah, I've seen too many of those. They have a beautiful vision, but too many of those not work out, or certainly not work out for the first guy, or maybe even the second guy. But maybe after it's
Mhm.
been foreclosed upon a couple times, the vision works. So I would be careful getting too creative and too visionary with real estate.
Yeah, it takes a certain type of risk tolerance to be able to do something like that. John, how have you structured your partnerships over the years? Okay. And what makes a good partnership work long term?
I don't think partnership deals have really changed since the pyramids. you know, there's the guy with the ambition and the drive, and those with the money to finance it. What we When we started out, interest rates were considerably higher, and so the preferred return that we paid our investors were higher. But when we started out, the typical deal couldn't have been simpler. It was the money gets a 10% preferred return, which accumulates every
Mhm.
year. And then once it gets that 10% return each year, then any cash flow above that, let's say there's $1 million invested, and so it needs that million gets the first 100,000. So if the property produces 120,000 in cash flow, first 100 to the money, then the next 20 gets split 50-50. So it's a 50-50 split above the 10% return on cash flow. And then on sale or refinance, same thing. If you haven't paid the 10% return, that gets caught up, then the money, then the 50-50 split. That's for a full development deal. If it's more of a paint and petunias deal where you, Emilio, say, hey, John, this house we can buy. All we need to do is paint it, and we can get in and out of it. So there's really no risk. The money might want as much as 80% because there isn't that much being done on the developer side. In my experience, goes between 50 and 80% to the money and the developer. The trick, guys, when you're trying to raise money from outside investors, is not to load it up with too many fees on your behalf. Best way to
Yeah.
sell this is to say, look, Emilio, you're my main investor. I'm going to take a really small fee, maybe 1% acquisition fee, so I can eat for the next year. But after that, you get your 10% return. you get your $1 million investment before I make any money. You know, at least that, you know, my money is behind yours. I'm not going to succeed if you don't. That's a much
Hmm.
better pitch. You know, I get packages all the time, and there's an acquisition fee, there are leasing fees, management fees, all kinds of fees built in. So you look at it and you say, well, this son of a bitch is going to make $500,000 regardless of whether the project succeeds or not. That, that's hard to sell. And by the way, if anyone pitches you in a deal like that, guys, don't invest with them.
No, no, administrative fees, all of these other fees. Oh man. Okay, good information. What's one strategy mindset shift that took place from just doing deals to building a sustainable business? You started part-time, right? You were an attorney and you started doing this part-time, but at what was that shift, John, where you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to do this full-time and make a sustainable business.
It was gradual. So I actually I started out as a litigator at a fancy San Francisco law firm, and after about 2 weeks, hated it. It's not like the movies.
2 weeks.
You know, they're not, people aren't wearing suspenders and walking around court and getting people free. It was just soul killing. But they had a good real estate department, a business department. They let me switch over to that. And so I started uh, doing deals representing developers. And I liked doing that. And for about 5, 6 years, I practiced law full time. But I also was learning, you know, watching other developers and how they set up deals. And I said, this is how what I want to do. When I left the practice of law, Emilio, I didn't think I'd be setting up this long-term company. I thought it's fun. It's more fun doing deals than it is being a lawyer. And things just kind of like a coral reef. It just sort of gradually grew and expanded on itself. But I didn't set out to set up a big company. Actually, all I really wanted to do when I started out in real estate was to make as much money as I would have as a partner in my old law firm, because doing deals and being my own boss was a whole lot more fun than practicing law. So I had a pretty low, and the partners do okay, but I had a pretty low benchmark, and then I was happy after that.
That's amazing. And you led with passion, and really that's what it's all about. Every person that I've ever met that's been, successful and is happy and fulfilled, they're leading with passion. And that's where it's at. When you do what you love, you're just going to want to do more of it.
Yeah, I know some extremely rich guys, and none of them are, who self-made and who set up their own businesses. None of those guys are ever going to retire because they have fun, they like it.
Why would you? Why would you?
If you're a mailman, you're going to retire, but if you can run your own business and you can control how much you work at it, how much grief you're willing to take on yourself, and how much you can delegate, no one leaves. They get carried out, on their shields.
And I look at it like this, right? When you see people that are depressed, right, or they're not fulfilling their purpose, right? Like if you see somebody that has a purpose, whatever it is, and they're passionate and they're driven, they're a lot less likely to be depressed or feeling crappy. And I think that's why so many people, especially in real estate, they just keep going and going and going. Like they take them out, like on their deathbed, they're in the middle of a massive project. They're 85, 90 years old. These guys are just crushing it still. And I think that's a fascinating thing. And in the show too, I like to cover more than just the financial end of it, and it's really amazing to see what makes people like yourself tick. Can I ask you, like, what is your driving, like, motivation? What's your why? What's your biggest focus? Why are you doing all of this?
I like to work. I always have, and I was always good at working, no matter what it was. And I always had kind of an employer's attitude. I could have retired, 25 years ago, and just, and you hear about guys who are 40 years old and, they made a couple million in Bitcoin or something, and now they live in Costa Rica on the beach. Well, that would drive me crazy.
Same.
I just enjoy what I do. I think what we do, development deals, figuring them out, is kind of like a three-dimensional chess game or a New York Times puzzle. It's okay. Here's the deal. Here's what I can do with it. Here's the money. Here's how I can sell it. Putting it all together, it's fun. It's not the be all and end all of life. I think the guys who do nothing but deals, and I'm sure you know a few, and so do I,
Hmm.
they tend to be pretty dull. Business will only take you so far.
That's
And
right.
what I like when I give these talks, I tell people, at the end of the day, if you're smart enough to succeed in business, then you're smart enough to realize that you are not going to be ultimately judged by your financial success. It's what you do with the money,
True.
it's what you give back to the community that counts. No rich guy in history has ever been well thought of unless he does something, for the community. You know, Midas, Croesus, all the terrible rich guys in history, and then the guys who redeemed themselves, like Carnegie, with building all the libraries, or Bill
Yeah.
Gates with the, everybody hated Bill Gates, when he was just the rich Microsoft billionaire, but then he sort of shifted into charities and he redeemed himself. Anyway, that's a bigger picture thing.
Yeah, and that's so important. Giving back is absolutely everything, and if you can find a way to give back, even in your early days of development, it's just that leads to so much more purpose. I love that. Let's talk with. We've got a few more minutes. Let's talk with our advanced developers. Okay, what is your approach to underwriting projects today versus 10 or 20 years ago, and how has your risk tolerance evolved?
On your very first deal, you're 100% successful or you're 100% failure, right? Mm-hmm. So you shouldn't be taking a great risk on your first half dozen deals. Uh, but think of, where do you guys go to gamble? Atlantic City?
I don't gamble, but yeah, Foxwoods, Connecticut.
I don't gamble either. I joke, I gamble for a living. Playing blackjack
That's right.
doesn't appeal to me. But the analogy works. When you start out with $100 and you're playing $1 a hand, you have to be careful or you'll get wiped out. But if suddenly you go on a great run and you're up $2,000 from your $100 investment, you're playing with the house's money. Okay, but if you have a long career and you're successful, and suddenly you've got a lot of the house's money. So yes, I can take risks today that I never would have been able to 20 years ago, 40 years ago. I can say, yeah, I know this. I'm not sure what I'll do with this piece of raw land, but I know it's a great piece. I can buy it and
Hmm.
I can pay cash for it. And this is how the rich get a lot richer, because they start saying, okay, I can take a flyer on this, and a lot more money gets made on Wall Street, by the way, than in real estate or in these big private equity funds. But the people, because they've got the cash, they can afford to lose, say, $5 million. They can take a wild risk. And if it pays off, maybe they get a 10x return. You can't do that early in your career. So,
Hmm.
so that's how the risk tolerance. If you're successful, you can tolerate more and more risk as you go on. On the other hand, people tend to almost axiomatically to get more conservative as they age, and so even if they've got the money, they don't want to take the risk.
Sure, sure. Makes sense. What are the biggest threats, okay, right now facing experienced developers that most aren't talking about?
Well, everybody talks all the time about everything. So today, in June 3rd, 2025, there's the uncertainty coming out of Washington. Are we going to have tariffs or are we not? Yeah, right now, deals, at least here in California, I will say almost categorically, development deals, Emilio, don't work today, with exceptions. The exceptions would be, let's say a hospital, you team up with a hospital wants a new hospital, or you team up with a tenant, they want a new building, you can build it for them. But speculative, industrial, multifamily, retail doesn't work. The only things that we're doing, just to bring it home to my small company, we're doing some high-end condominiums here in Palo Alto uh,
Hmm.
at a frightful cost, but Palo Alto is crazy expensive for housing, so it should work. And then we're working with QSRs, quick serve restaurants. If you can find one, say a McDonald's or a Starbucks or a Chick-fil-A, that'll do a ground lease. It's very simple underwriting. You buy the ground, let's say at that 7% return, and you can sell it at a 5% return. So the only risk you're taking, assuming you can get the lease done, is where cap rates will be on the sale in a couple of years. Those make sense. But otherwise, development doesn't make sense right now. The equity, back to my earlier comment that you can always raise money. Equity right now, the big equity, seems to be sitting on its hands. The younger guys are saying, whoa, prices are down, like San Francisco apartments. Prices are way
Mm.
down. We should just go in and buy everything we can. And the equity says, well, we don't know it's going to go up. We don't know where returns are going to be, where interest rates are going to be. So right now it's a little tricky raising equity. And the banks are are starting to get queasy because they need to be making loans, but it's still really hard to borrow money right now. So
Mm.
I would say that the younger guys, your age, are worried both about financing and equity right now. And then the smarter ones among them are saying, even if I had the financing and the equity, I'm not sure I want to build because the numbers are too tight, or actually negative.
Makes sense. John, you brought up, you basically brought up, and it's a good lead into my next question about the younger guys, younger girls coming in. And I have a generational wealth question for you because there's the silver hair tsunami, right? The baby boomers are in control of, yeah, right. I love working with baby boomers, by the way. You guys are polite, know what you want, and are willing to pay. Okay. And there's always something to learn from baby boomers. But the silver hair tsunami, okay. So the baby boomers are controlling what, like 65, 70% of the wealth of this country and have been. And there's going to be that generational wealth shift. How is that going to change development? And how do you feel that generational wealth should be handled in the development business, especially when transitioning leadership?
Well, it's a very individual thing. In my case, I've got four lovely children, all very bright, and my two partners have another four children, but none of them are really interested in the business. So we will probably devolve to like a family office where we'll have a president of the company, not related, run the existing portfolio. We won't expect him to do, because we won't be here, more development, but run the core portfolio for the sake of the children. I would, that kind of a more philosophical level, I would wish that, frankly, and I'm sure I'm going to get some boos on this, that we have a greater estate tax, and some of that money, when these deals, when the baby boomer developers who know what they're doing pass their projects on to their heirs, who likely as not will become passive investors, the trust fund kids, there'll be a lot of opportunities for the guys like you to say, hey, you've got this asset that you don't really know what to do with, or you've got this asset that you're not taking care of. We've had great luck over the years buying properties from people who've inherited them, and who they get to a point where, oh my gosh, we've milked it all these years for our cash flow, and now it needs to be totally rebuilt. And so, and we buy it from them. I think when real estate gets into the hands of people who really can't run it correctly, then it's a good opportunity for those who can to come in and buy it, or joint venture with them.
Yeah, and that's true. We're seeing that. We're seeing things unfortunately either get mismanaged or people that haven't been hands-on are taking things over and letting it go where it shouldn't, and so on. So I hear you. I think that's a huge opportunity. John, any closing statements, any words of advice or knowledge that you'd like to share?
People ask me, when is the best time to get into real estate? And I almost always say now. Even if it's hard today, but I think if it's hard, then there are fewer people doing it. So I think, back to, if you're going to start out, go find that broken down house in a good neighborhood. I have a young friend who I had given him this advice, and here's the tip. What he did, he picked a neighborhood that he wanted to work in, and he walked around just, like, say, 10 square blocks, and he looked at all the houses that looked abandoned or unkempt, or weeds were overgrown. And then he went to Costco and he bought a case of wine, like $7 a bottle of wine, but they with a fancy label, so it looked better. And then each of those houses, he wrote a note and he said, and this is true. He said, my wife and I are expecting a baby. Uh, we would very much like to, talk to you if you're interested in selling the house. And it sounds corny, but it worked. uh, he, he told me he got a call back from a woman, an older woman who was mad at brokers. She had a bad experience with brokers. And then, and I don't know about the East Coast, but there are all kinds of guys who advertise on television here. We buy houses. We buy houses for cash.
Yeah. Wholesalers.
This woman had received an offer from one of these guys out of the blue, basically probably just off of Zillow comps for $1.3 million. And he called me and said, hey, she wants to talk to me. She's willing to sell. She has this offer for $1.3 million. I said, great, go see her today and offer her $1.325 million. And it worked. The house needs a fair bit of work. People had died and she lived out of state, but he's now in the midst of fixing it up. So, this just happened in the last couple of months. And this house buying, flipping is very, very competitive, but it works. I would just say, go out and do it. Be careful, but do it.
Absolutely. And, John McNellis, again, best-selling book author. You can find his book, Making It in Real Estate. Version 3 is either out or about to be out. That's version 2, right? That you're showing, Making It in Real Estate. Starting out as a developer. Check that book out. It's amazing. He's got a lot of really great content in there, 40 years of experience poured out into this book. And make sure you follow him all over social media. He is just a great resource and a great guy. John, it was so nice having you on with us.
My pleasure, Emilio. Thank you very much.
Awesome. You're very welcome. Do you live in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, and you're thinking about moving? Well, the worst thing you can do is ask your friends to come help you, because then guess what? You owe them a favor. Never mind. You're going to be spending a ton of money on beer and pizza, and stuff is going to get broken. It sucks. Call our friends GMET's Moving and Storage. They're going to be able to move you, especially in this marketplace, but they can actually ship your stuff around the world and move you with their crew of dedicated professionals anywhere in the United States. Go ahead and Google GMET's Moving and Storage, and they'll help you out today. Thanks for tuning in to The Wealth Architect. We have a fantastic show for you next week. Please feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube, like us, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And thanks so much for tuning in. Take care.